Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Neo4j Online Meetup. Karine is busy at Spark Summit this week, so it's so you just get me again. So today we've got Alex is going to be talking to us about using graphs to fight diabetes. But before I let Alex introduce himself, just a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a live chat on the right-hand side if you're watching this live, right-hand side of the video. If you have any questions, you can ask them on there, and I'll pass them on to Alex when there's an appropriate gap. We're going to be showing some examples from the Neo4j browser, so you want to make sure your resolution is set to 720p, so you can control that on the little cog on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. But of course, we'll make sure that the screen is suitably zoomed in as well. Other than that, I guess maybe Alex, maybe you can introduce yourself. I guess maybe just quickly, quick introduction to yourself, and maybe a few sentences on how you got into Neo4j in the first place is usually where we start.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So my name is Alexander. I'm working at the German Center for Diabetes Research, which is a federal institute in Germany studying diabetes, and we try to develop prevention and therapy strategies in order to have healthy people. So my background is I'm a bioinformatician. I did my PhD in biochemistry and structural biochemistry, doing 3D reconstructions of microscopic images and modeling. And since 2 years now, I'm the head of the data and knowledge management, as I said, at the German Center for Diabetes Research. And first of all, what is diabetes? Diabetes is a metabolic disease where the insulin, which is a little protein in your body that controls the sugar level that comes from the pancreas, and the insulin production is reduced, or your body responds pretty poorly on this little insulin molecule. And the consequence is that you cannot uptake any sugar from your blood into your body cells, and the sugar remains in the blood, which is called hyperglycemia. And this causes tremendous complications, especially on the long term. And unfortunately, diabetes is not curable. In general, we have type 1 diabetes, which is mainly with children. So you're born with it. The more patients we have for type 2 diabetes, which is closely related to obesity. And there are some rare forms of diabetes, especially gestational diabetes. So just quickly to give you some numbers, what we're talking about. So worldwide, we have 420 million patients spread it across the globe, and that's the number has quadrupled since the 1980s, which is very alarming. We have another 200 million diabetic, let's say, patients that are undiagnosed, so they don't know that they have diabetes. And in the former times, it has been assumed that 2/3 that diabetes is more related to elder people, but actually we have 2/3 of all the people with diabetes in the working age. And that costs the global health insurances $700 billion per year. When we have a comparison to the US, and I only compare it because we are in Germany. So in Germany, we have 7 million patients. In the US, it's 13 million. And there are another 84 million that have a pre-diabetes. So they are kind of obese and tend to have a diabetes in the next years. And when you see the number that America spends for diabetes per year, which is $300 billion, it's quite a number that could be spent somewhere else. So this chart shows you the distribution of obese and overweight people in the US between the 1980s and 2009. And you can already see that the legend had to be adopted for it. So we have a lot of obese people, which is mainly the cause because diabetes comes to it. When we talk about complications of diabetes, it's usually the fact that you have diabetes for several years. You don't feel it in your blood. You don't feel you don't feel bad, but there are many complications where you see, okay, one of the other person dies because of a heart attack or because of a stroke, and that mainly comes from diabetes. We also got complications in the nerves. So diabetic patients often lose their feet or their hand because the nerves are degraded by the immune system. There are co-complications to other disease areas like Alzheimer's. This is caused in the brain. Also, the stroke is related to the brain. And many people have problems with the kidney because there's so much sugar in the bloodstream that you can't clear it with your kidneys. So who we are, maybe to spend some words on the German Center for Diabetes Research. You see the map of Germany. We are an academic federal institute that is non-profit, and we have several locations spread across the country. Our main associated partners are in Berlin, in Potsdam, which is the Institute for Nutrition Research. We have university clinics in Dresden, in Düsseldorf, and in Tübingen. And we got the Helmholtz Research Institute in Munich, where I'm based. And altogether, we have more than 400 researchers that are either medical doctors or basic research scientists. Our research fields are mainly nutrition or diet. We have research in beta cells and multi-omics data, so genetics, proteomics, multi-omics, and so on. We have clinical studies. We have data from cohorts where we just gather data from, healthy people or other disease areas, and we collect data from them, and we try to find connections between these diseases. And our main goal is the prevention of diabetes. So we are not a pharma company. We don't earn money with this. We try to provide specific diabetes treatments to different kinds of people. And we try to prevent these long-term complications that I spoke 2 slides ago. So as I said, the goal is prevention and individualized therapy of the people. And what we usually have is a population here, and they have different subtypes of diabetes, and we want to cluster them and identify the clusters, so the subtypes of diabetes, if they respond to a specific therapy or to a specific prevention strategy. And we want to provide individualized treatment of these subtypes. So we're coming more to the technical part now. So how do we fight diabetes? Usually the institutes and the university clinics have been classical data silos with relational databases. Here in the hospital part, we have relational databases with patients' data, like what kind of drug is a patient taking, or how large or how much weight does a patient. Then we have clinical or basic research where we have animal models like mice or pre-diabetic pigs. We have genetics. We have small molecules research. We have different kinds of cells that we are looking to and analyzing and studying. And the third part is more the let's say, the data analysis, something like microscopy data or like statistics of different data sets. And they were all siloed, which is the classical thing. And we had the idea to connect these data points together, and we call this the DCD Connect, which is a Neo4j graph database, and that's why we are here today. So when I started like 2 years ago, I was visiting all the different locations, our partner locations, and it turned out that we have a lot of data. I don't want to say big data, but we have enormous amounts of data, and this is basically very heterogeneous. Because we have patients' data and we have privacy problems with sharing the data and analyzing the data, we started with connecting the meta level and providing a catalog for our scientists where they can browse what kind of data sets we have within our organization. And so we don't touch the raw data, and we have a closer look to what kind of data we have in the specific locations. And I started to classify them, let's say, to animal model data. Here is in yellow, and here we have basic research data here and there. And this is pretty obvious to give them labels. And this is where we come now to Neo. We label and classify the data sets, and we connect them. And this is basically our data model. I can give you here a short example. What we store at the nodes here on a meta level. For example, when we look on the right side, we have literature data where we have scientific publications. They have a title, they have an identifier in the database, they are published in a specific year, and they have different keywords and journals. And we connect this literature data to the people that are performing the analysis and writing papers. And these people, so our researchers, they are doing experiments. And in these experiments, we capture different parameters, or we acquire different biosamples like blood or urine or even nerves from different organisms. And we can browse here in the Neo4j database how many samples do we have, what's the size of the data sample, and so on, in which freezer are they, so all this kind of metadata. We have image data where we can say we have a microscopic image. What can we see on the picture? How many pictures do we have? And the main focus here in this data model is are the parameters. So which parameters are measured or captured in different experiments across the locations, across the disciplines, and across species. So what kind of questions can we answer with this? Usually these questions are pretty easy for our medical doctors, and they are very complicated to query for relational databases. With graph databases, it's much easier to answer these questions. And one of the first questions that our medical doctors had was how many biosamples were acquired in a visit, which is a visit number 17 of our clinical study, which is called PLIS, and which parameters are measured on these biosamples. And there you can see we have samples that are in a freezer, and we have a visit, which is kind of patients come to a visit in a university hospital, and there are experiments performed on these biosamples. So it's pretty much connected data. And this is the query to the database. We have our clinical study PLIS here, and we got different patients in red that you can see. And with these patients go to a specific visit here in purple. In these visits, we have different experiments that are sometimes repeated. So, for example, they go to an MRI so like magnetic resonance imaging, or they are measured in terms of their height or weight or how old they are. Sometimes in a visit, they take a urine sample or a blood sample, and according to the sample, we have some parameters that are measured. And for example, here in the blood, we measure the glucose level on different time stamps, and so we have time series data for specific patients. Another query that we can realize is because we connect our database, our Neo4j database, to another Neo4j database from a little startup company called Knowing. This is the logo here. And what they are doing, they have a graph of roughly 800 million nodes and edges where they connect different, let's say, life science entities like genes or proteins. We have different metabolic pathways. We have, what else do they have? Metabolites. These are small compounds that affect these other molecules here, and we connect this Neo4j database in order to query different molecules from different species. And I hope I can explain it well to you what we're trying to answer there. When we start on the left side, we have a human patient that has some genetic variations. It's called a SNP, SNP. And in the public databases, they have roughly 100 of these so-called SNPs that can cause diabetes. And these SNPs have to be, these are positions in the genome that have to be mapped through different databases here. So we map to a genetic database, and from there we map to a metabolic database, and from there we map to different enzymes. These are little proteins. And these molecules here, they are connected to even smaller molecules here in red that are interesting now. Because when we come from the other side, from our animal model, where we can do experiments that we cannot do in humans, we can measure these small molecules here that we have in a diabetic pig or so, and we can map those identifiers back and build a so-called join. And this is what's interesting for us. In this example, we ended up in 7 small molecules that are overlapping between a diabetic pig and a diabetic patient. And what we can do now is we can identify those 7 metabolites, these small molecules, and do experiments with it. And maybe we can do some predictions. A very new prototype we built according to natural language processing that I guess most of you have heard about it. So we want to understand a large amount of texts so that we can learn from these texts and gather information. And one example here is that we have a database with 30 million scientific texts. It's called PubMed, where we have outcomes from basic research, from medical research, and these texts are usually quite long, so between 4 or 20 or 30 pages, and they are very complicated to understand, and there's much going on. As I said, 30 million publications, and usually when the people are, or when our researchers want to query this database, they look for diabetes and obesity, and usually what they get back is like 30,000 articles that they should usually read. And of course, nobody's able to read 30,000 articles. And what we want to try now is to automatically understand what's going on in these scientific texts. Like, is it talking about genes or a disease or a specific animal model or whatever? And we try to build connections between these texts. And when we have a look on the right side, we have a text here in purple that is described by a certain amount of keywords. And you see that between different texts, there are overlaps here in these nodes, and they are overlapping in keywords. And this is what we are doing with GraphAware. And one of the long-term goals is to understand scientific texts between diabetes and maybe cardiovascular diseases like stroke or heart attack, or also between diabetes and Alzheimer's. And so we try to find the connections between different disease areas. I don't want to overload you with too much of this scientific information. That's why I just wanted to briefly give you some take-home messages. So in our scientific field, we are moving from this classical relational databases towards a more sophisticated solutions, also with the data model. So this is obviously graph technology. And with this, we are enabling not multi-comics, but multi-omics data analysis, so that we can connect different research areas. Just to thank Anya and Tim. So this is my team. So we are 3 people that are managing this database, and I can maybe give you a short glimpse of what we can show you from the Neo4j database. For example, when we click here on studies.
Alex, quick question before you do that from the chat. So this is from Yuli. The question is, how do you get the publication data? Did you parse it from somewhere, or do you link to the publications after the research is conducted?
So the database PubMed is publicly available. Mostly we are getting the abstracts, so like a short summary from the text, but we also get the full texts as a database dump, several gigabytes. And what we are starting now is together with GraphAware to analyze these texts and bring them in this form of the keywords. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. The live stream is a little bit behind where we are, so I guess we'll find out in a sec. But yeah, I think that was covered. Anyway, thanks.
Are there more questions before I give you a little glimpse on the meta-database?
Yeah, we got a couple more. So follow up from that one. Did you pass all the PubMed data or just the diabetes focused stuff?
Well, actually, all the text that we get. As I said, maybe to switch back to the slides. What we are trying to do is not only focusing on diabetic research, but also on, let's say, lung diseases. So we got lung fibrosis as a complication, as a long-term complication from diabetes. So we take all the publications that we get from PubMed, can also be from, not from life sciences, but from, I don't know, something else, physics or something. And we try to find new connections that we didn't see before. So we're not focusing on only diabetes.
Cool. Okay. And then another question. So this one's from Saji. Does the graph of the patients and research articles, maybe are the graphs of the patients and research articles linked, or are they different databases?
So we are just starting with GraphAware, and I did only a little prototype on my machine, so they are not connected yet. But in the future, of course, we want to connect the literature data or the literature connection Neo4j database with our results that we have in our organization.
Cool. And then we've got another question back to the previous one. So it says you have 6 keywords and then you pass them. I guess this is linking back to the natural language processing question with the different diseases. So I guess yes, is that.
So it's not a query for diabetes or for cardiovascular diseases. What we're doing it unbiased. We are processing all the text that we can get, and then our researchers, they can query for diabetes and a gene called ABC1, or like a phenotype. We got mice with green hair and it got infectious diseases in Africa. Do we have a connection there? So these kinds of questions we can hopefully answer with this.
Cool. We've got another question as well, which I guess maybe actually can be answered by your queries in the Neo4j browser. So the question is, how many nodes and relationships do you have in the database, and what's your approach to writing data in?
As usual, the one database that I usually try to show you is not online right now. So here we have in our developers database 6,500 nodes and 20,000 relationships. But I must say these are mainly parameters that we measure. So I would say 6,700 parameters, roughly, or 6,000. They are quite a lot that we measure. And what you can do as a researcher is you can go there and ask the question. Maybe we can go to the example here. What we can do here is we can ask the question. What kind of parameters are overlapping between 2 different clinical studies that we have? For example, here, and I will show you that live, one clinical study that we have is the German diabetes study, GDS, and another one which basically studies liver fat, which also causes diabetes. These are 2 different studies. And we have different patients in there, and now the question is for a data set to merge it together. Are there some parameters that we can, like merge together, that we have a bigger data set? And just did a query here. So we're jumping from one study over the visits. So the patient goes to a visit, and in the visit, several experiments are performed, and in each experiment, different parameters are measured. So this is basically the data model. And what you can see here are these, like 2, 4, 6 parameters are measured in both studies. And so you can merge these data sets from different clinical studies. This is the kind of queries you can do with the meta database. And once you're interested in that, you can go to the specific responsible medical doctors and ask for getting the raw data. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it does. I guess we'll see if we get any follow-up questions. But yeah, I guess you can carry on for the moment.
Yeah, so that's basically what I can show you right now. I have several little prototypes, but running on another machine. But long story short, all these little prototypes are built in Neo4j, and we are, making a big puzzle and sticking them together so that we can query through different types of data and can connect our medical doctors with the clinical research and with the animal models in the basic research field. And yeah, hopefully we can contribute to any better prevention or therapy.
So who would be like the users of the database? Would they be using it, like, would they be writing queries directly in Cypher, or would they be interacting like through a UI of some sort? How does that work?
So the main users are the medical doctors right now, because lots of these integrated data is clinical data. When I showed them the Neo4j database, they were quite amazed that this is now graphical, like not huge Excel sheets that nobody understands and has to join something here and there and copy paste and stuff like that. So they were pretty amazed of the visualization tool, although the visualization is pretty simple here. When we take some time with the medical doctors, they are starting to understand what's the data model, and that the data model is very easy to translate into a Cypher query. So some of the doctors can write already some Cypher queries. We recently tried out the Bloom application on top of that, so that they can start to write, like, Mark, how would you say it? Like human-like queries?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess you can also, if you had some queries that you're repeating, you could save those, and then they could just type in like a shorter sentence to do it.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of a doctor writing Cypher though. That's quite cool.
Yeah. So there are only a few doctors that can write Cypher, but they say it's much easier than like SQL or something like that. And
so you mentioned, like, when you were describing this approach like towards the beginning of the talk, that so you mentioned relational databases then. So was the data previously accessible from a relational database? Because you've also mentioned spreadsheets. I was just wondering how those things
we have all kinds of data. So there are spreadsheets, there are paper files from patients, there are all kinds of CSV files, relational databases, just folders of different pictures, and then a little text file saying, in this picture you see, I don't know, this and that. So there's everything, basically everything. It's wild. Let's say it like this.
And so what this database is trying to do is sort of make it easy to search across all those different types of data.
Exactly. So the metadatabase is meant to be like a we say yellow pages, like you can ask where is the data and who's responsible for that, and what's the kind of consent that we have, let's say, for specific clinical studies. So can I use the data? Can I use it for another purpose? And usually you just use the phone and call the medical doctors. Do you have this and that data? And they say no, or yes, or maybe. And so it wasn't transparent enough. And that's why we introduced the metadatabase, so that we can query the data itself, so the data sets between the different locations and between the different disciplines. And we are now starting another graph with raw data from time series. So when we measure glucose data or other kinds of clinical parameters, and we are trying to find patterns there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess this might be a question that a few people have, but we have at least one person asking, like, if they want to get in contact with you to talk about your work and the work that other people are doing, what's the best way to do that?
So on a technical side, it's pretty easy. Just drop me an email or connect via LinkedIn. Or you can find me when you Google my name, and then we can exchange about the ideas, or how we get to this specific model and this and that. I often get some questions, can we get the data? And this is not so easy to answer. So since we are a federal institute and we have patients' data, it's not that easy to get data. To query the Neo4j database, like to get information in general, and to get in touch with our organization, I guess this is possible. Yeah. So
is the email the one that you and I have been interacting with? Can I share that with people?
Yes, you can share that.
Okay, we've got some more questions. Well, I think you may have answered this one before, but we can try again. So what were the nodes and relationship counts on the production database? I think you said it was...
Oh, the production database was roughly 100,000 or something like this.
Okay.
Depends on when you ask this question, because we are integrating more and more data. And since we're only 3 people, like it's ongoing work. So it grows.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And then... so this is sort of another follow-up question. How often do you update the database? Like, are you putting new stuff in every day, or is it?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the production server is not running right now. But usually, I wouldn't say days, but I would say like every 2nd or 3rd week or so, we are integrating some new data, and then we are trying it out, and then we are talking to the medical doctors and to the basic researchers, and see if they like it. If they like the data model, then we are kind of adjust the data model and try to write more efficient queries, stuff like that. So it's growing slowly. Yeah.
And then the second part of the question is about the NLP library. So the question was, did you create your own one? Which I think the answer is no, but maybe you could share show people the graph aware.
Yes, so this idea came on a conference where we talked about several publications, and then I said, yeah, I can't read all the publications, so I have to try to find a solution for that. And then I saw GraphAware with the NLP technique, and I just tried it out. So there's a free tutorial that you can do on GitHub. And you can input your text there and let it run. And so we are now working together with GraphAware on, as I said, on these several million articles now. So we didn't develop it ourselves.
Cool. I think hopefully that answered that question. I don't think we have any more questions at the moment. I think you may have. How do researchers interface with the data? So I think that was what we talked about before, that some of them are writing Cypher queries and some of them are using Bloom, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay. I've got another new question. Or do you still have something for the last one?
Oh yeah, maybe also to answer this question, some researchers, if they don't have a specific question, but they just want to browse for data sets, so what do we have in the organization, especially when they are new, they just go to the browser and click there, which is okay. But if you have several thousand nodes and relationships, at some point it gets messy, and then they are starting to do Cypher queries and get in touch with me. And yeah, so in the beginning they do a little bit of clicking, and it's really nice because you have a visualization and you can do screenshots which you can use in your presentation. So this is mainly the first how do you say, the first connection to the database.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question, for the literature-based discovery, do you need to use Neo4j clusters to host large amounts of nodes and relationships? I guess given you said the size was like in the hundreds of thousands, I guess it's reasonably easy to fit all that data on a single machine, right?
Yeah, so this is pretty much on a single machine. We get 6 cores, 128 gigs of RAM, several gigabytes of SSD, so it's not a problem at all. And as I said, so these are the this is the small database with just the metadata. So we have 100,000 nodes. It's pretty easy. When we start integrating raw data, it gets much bigger.
Okay. Another question: do you use the community or enterprise version of the Graphware NLP stuff? If you've got that far yet.
Can you repeat the question?
Do you use? Sorry, the question is: do you use the community or enterprise version of the Graphware NLP library?
Yeah, so we started with the community edition, but we changed 1.5 years ago to the enterprise.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can start to wrap up, unless people have any more questions. Do you have any, like, apart from the NLP stuff, is there any other sort of areas that you're looking to extend the database in that you think people would be interested in?
Yes, so we have maybe a new researcher coming who's interested in how do you say, the pattern of movement that people are doing. Let's say when you look on your Google Maps timeline. Let's say I used the subway to go to work, and then I walked for 1.5 kilometers, and then I took the bike, and then I go on holiday and stuff like that, so that people are sharing their data and sharing their timelines. And we try to integrate that into Neo4j and do graph analytics. So how are the people behaving on movement? And how is it related to some clinical data? For example, when we have patients and you give them an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, are the ones that are more sportive, are they healthier or not? Or what kind of diet do they get? And we try to connect this data with health insurance data that we get. So this is let's say, a new field that we also try to integrate now. Yeah.
Cool. That sounds like a fun one. I've played around with the timeline data before. It's a bit of a weird one to write about because it's really, really personal data.
Yeah.
So you're like exposing everything that you do. If you like where your house is, where your office is, where your supermarket is. So I've never written it up. I still have it just on my machine.
Yeah, so these are, like just ideas how we could study diabetes because it's closely related to obesity and nutrition, sports, and stuff like that. I always say that the cocktail of evil. So physical inactivity and bad food habits and alcohol. This is the cocktail of evil which causes diabetes. And on the other hand, this is the most interesting kind of data you can get, right? You see real world data. People are going to McDonald's. People are going to parties and having alcohol, and or are just hanging out on the couch. And on the other hand, you have sportive ones. But there are also some interesting data points that we see. So we have healthy, let's say, women that are lean and they have diabetes, and we have we say the happy obese. We have very, very obese people that do not have diabetes, and these are not only outliers, but they are very interesting to study. And obviously, you can't give them the same therapy or the same prevention strategy. That makes it much more interesting. Yeah,
I guess you would probably don't really want to see your timeline with people who are working from home. You probably wouldn't go anywhere. Yeah, my timeline doesn't look good on those days. It's like, you didn't move at all. We've got a question from CB. Can you talk about the import of data into Neo4j? Like, is it imported? I guess maybe is it imported using Cypher? Is it, or is it some other approach?
Depending on what collaborator we have and what how the data looks like. So sometimes we have like spreadsheets that we import via Cypher. Then we have databases where you have an API. It's really depending on the data set that you try to integrate. Variety of different approaches.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I guess we can probably call it a day there. So thanks, Alex, for coming and presenting to us. And for everybody who's watching, if you enjoyed the talk, don't forget to like it on YouTube so that other people can find it. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next one. We haven't got one scheduled yet, but I'm sure we'll get that sorted out soon. So yeah, thanks again, Alex.
Thanks for having me. And everyone who has questions, just drop me an email. And I hope I can answer that. And yeah, enjoy your evening.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.